Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And I'm Strong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 23 of season 6. Sam and I had a discussion around the capability of Microsoft Purview DLP, one of Purview's capabilities that provides data loss prevention across Microsoft 365 and more. Here are a few things that we covered. What is data loss prevention and why is it important? What are the capabilities that Purview has around DLP? How do you get started? And how do you license it?
We've noticed that a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to us for you to show your support to the show.
It's a really great episode, so let's dive in.
Hello, Mr. Purview. Oh, sorry, Alan. How are you this week?
I'm all right. How are you?
You didn't expect that one, did you? I'm good, thank you. sorry about that. I couldn't help myself.
To be fair, so you said Mister. I think it triggered me that what you were going to say, but yeah.
Anyway, anything new and exciting on your radar this week, Al?
I think there's been a data breach with Jaguar Land Rover, hasn't there, recently?
Oh yeah, I haven't seen any specifics. I saw a LinkedIn post of somebody like posting a greyed out Range Rover that they should have had delivered recently. I don't know any specifics. Do you know anything about it?
I think it was done by is it Lapras? Is that one of the attacking groups?
Okay.
And I think it's a mixture of that and Scatter Spider, in effect, like a combo this time. I think it might have been around. Again, I've not had full thing, but it might have been social engineering, similar to the M&S and things like that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think everything's down. Yeah, like you said, no orders,
no deliveries. Yeah.
So, yeah. But no, not seen anything else. Been pretty head down in work and stuff. So,
did you see the thing about the Entra ID actor tokens today?
No.
A researcher, I'm following him on X. I can't remember his name. Was preparing for I think a DEF CON talk, and he's got a load of tools around Entra ID. Like reconnaissance and security, and he basically he's got knowledge of like underlying like tokens that are used behind the scenes, basically between things like SharePoint and Entra 365 and stuff like that. They call them actor tokens. They essentially impersonate users. And he found a vulnerability where he could manipulate a JWT token that wasn't signed properly to impersonate another tenant, essentially. So as long as he knew the underlying ID for a user in another tenant, he could masquerade as that user, even global admins, essentially. And then just use Graph API to pull data in. But he had read and write access because he was global admin. He did disclose it to Microsoft, and they fixed it, I believe, within 48 or 72 hours, stuff like that. And then he disclosed it afterwards. But yeah, if you search for, I think it's like Entra ID actor token theft or something like that, it's quite insane. And when a lot of these like I'll call them like vulnerabilities with Entra ID come out, they require, somebody's abusing like the primary refresh token or enrollment or something like that. They have to jump through all of these like mental hoops. Do you know what I mean? Like you have to be like an admin on the device and have X, Y, or Z. But this was like all I needed to know was their ID, basically, which I could get from like a B2B invite or something like that, So, so you essentially as a B2B guest, you could impersonate a global admin on the other side, basically, which is just like crazy. And then I saw a bulletin about SonicWall firewalls tonight going out. That some people had been brute forcing passwords for SonicWall firewalls, and it requires like the fix is to essentially refresh I think it's refresh like the primary secret or certificate, I can't remember, which means you have to refresh like everything downstream of that, like MFA and session tokens, etc. So I saw that happening in our sort of security news chat. So yeah, some pretty big things actually in the security world. I would say.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot of like firewalls and things like that getting in VPN solutions. Definitely getting vulnerabilities seen. I think like is it Fortinet or FortiGate sort of firewalls or VPN solutions seem to be. I think there's some memes around, isn't there? Around it, just saying which vulnerability you on about, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly like what you say. Like it was at one point like one a week, for Fortinet, and now it, to your point, it's like, it seems like every other day. I don't know whether we're just seeing. I don't know whether companies are just disclosing more than they did before, but we're seeing so many more, high profile vulnerabilities, if that makes sense, from these, like, I would call large vendors, right? Because I would say even SonicWall is like a large vendor, right? In the space that they operate, and it's like, I don't know, I don't know what it is, but I just feel like more recently it's all been like, I'll call it like infrastructure. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, and
identity providers, firewalls,
Yeah, and it's not like it's things that are like new.
No, yeah,
Things
exactly.
like when DeepSeek got compromised and ChatGPT when they first sort of came out. It's not something new that's been forgotten about. These have been running for 10, 20, 30 years, and don't get me wrong, the world's changed since then. But they've been their sole purpose is to be that security, bit.
But the thing is, I wonder if it's like that vulnerability that I just mentioned about like Entra, right? Was that JWT token previously signed, and now it's somebody's like pushed an update and they've just missed a line of code out or something like that, and they've become unsigned, right? Is it just a case of like just newer platforms have a higher frequency of bugs because they're new, and older platforms have high frequency of bugs because they're maintained over a long period of time, and their code bases are absolutely huge. Their attack surface just grows by the day, essentially. I don't know. But one thing's for sure, that cybersecurity is like, we'll call it cybercrime, is it's never been busier, has it?
No.
It's almost like every other day that we have a high profile breach, and not just a breach of, because we had breaches of data, didn't we? Ransomware, or literally breaches of credit card or PII data. But now we're also seeing like massive targeted ransomware that is there to disrupt manufacturing or retail lines, aren't we? I feel like that has become more, I'll call it quotes, popular, but I suppose that was always there. Maybe it's just more like mainstream now and public and known about, don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's that, and like you said, it's not now. Maybe you have got data theft, which is obviously key, but if you can take down an organization for a couple of days, I mean, actually in the news, I think recently, even today, I think it was, GCHQ, or our side of it is arrested two teenagers for the attack on the underground.
Yeah,
and that was today that they've arrested them from London and somewhere up north.
Well, yeah, and to your point, I don't think it's just a couple of days. I was in like Marks and Spencer's the other day, and I overheard this conversation of like a worker behind like the bakery counter talking to somebody about it was like a product coming in or something, and they literally quoted like, "We're still recovering from the cyber attacks," basically. And I just walked on by, basically. I was like, this isn't the conversation for me, right? But it's just like, you know, and when was M&S? 3 months ago? You know, maybe I can't remember exactly, but it was, you know, it wasn't yesterday. You know, so
No,
absolutely crippling. You know?
again, yeah, it might be that their systems are up, but they're now checking supply chain and
Yeah,
broken all, orders might
ties.
be manual temporarily,
Yeah,
or
cut the hard lines.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Anyway, talking about, you know, exfiltration of data, Alan. What are we talking about this week? Did you like that? That wasn't bad, was it? You know.
No, it's all right. I think you gave it away with Mr. Purview, but hey, yeah. So we're talking about data loss prevention in Purview, but it's probably going to be. There's probably again within Purview. There's multiple solutions. DLP is part of it. It does integrate with various other parts of Purview, but also Purview has multiple areas within it as well around what you can protect and where you can protect. So I'm going to say it's probably like a little bit of a whistle stop tour, or medium depth into it, because I think we could probably talk about one or two of the topics in an episode itself.
Yeah, for sure. Right, should we get started then? So Alan, you know, what is data loss prevention? And I suppose, you know,
It says it on the
you
tin,
know,
doesn't it? No.
sorry, say that again. I didn't.
It says it on the tin, doesn't it? Prevents loss of data.
What does that? Right, episode over. Thanks ever so much for listening. If you made it this far, thank you. No, anyway, yeah. So you know, what is data loss prevention, and you know, why is it important for organisations, and you know, why should we care about it?
Yeah. Okay. So, within organisations, data is transitioning various locations, stores, through email, through SharePoint, through file shares, on-prem, through SaaS services. And data loss prevention is there to either prevent oversharing, or the accidental sharing of sensitive data to an organization. Now, sensitive data to an organization could be very different, per organization. It depends on what the data they're sort of using. They may have something that's not necessarily standard, like intellectual property, things like that maybe they don't want to be exposed to the public, or exposed out onto the internet, or to other companies, organizations, etc. That they just don't want it to be out there. And that could be accidental, could be competitors, and this could be like I said, accidental from users. So just send an email accidentally adding the wrong Alan onto it, and it's an external user, and sending something that's maybe damaging or critical, sensitive to the organization. So data loss prevention, DLP, is the sort of technology part, or the technology part of preventing, or attempting to prevent data leaving the organization in the various ways it can, to prevent that data loss in effect. And I said it was the technology side because there is maybe a people process side, where it's the check who you're sending to, the policies in place about how data should be handled in the organization and things like that. What should be, what's allowed to leave the organization, what shouldn't be left. We then get down to classifications, what types of data should be let leave and what shouldn't, etc. And again, we could go down another rabbit hole around that part. But yeah, so, and it's important, as it kind of sounds, to reduce the risk of data leaving accidentally, or when when potentially compromised, a bad actor trying to exfiltrate that data in the various ways they're going to try for that. How is it done? It's in various sort of areas. So that could be an email security gateway. Could be Exchange Online, Purview DLP, but can also be appliances that look at the network traffic that's going that's running on your network. Could be through proxies, through SASE solutions, that kind of thing. So depending on where you want to protect, depends on what technology or functionality you need to put in place. So I think that's So you can protect as much as you can. There may be some gaps that you can't protect, but again, using multiple tools might be the answer, or trying to consolidate into a unified DLP solution.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I suppose that that's in essence, we're stopping data, leaving via avenues that we don't want it to, and to control those avenues, right?
Yeah, and I think it's from two parts to it as well. There is the prevention, so blocking it itself, but there also might just be monitoring. So whilst you might allow data to leave to a certain organization, maybe a partner, etc., you might still want to be alerted about the amount of data going that way, but still be okay with it leaving, if that makes sense. So more of a monitoring and alerting rather than prevention as well. Again, it depends if you want to highlight when something is happening, and then maybe trigger some more investigations with something like insider risk management, etc. Other tooling.
Okay, yeah. So can you tell us how Purview sort of caters for DLP?
Yeah, so Purview has, I would say, grown. Well, Purview itself has grown quite large from a solution perspective, but from a DLP perspective, there's now been a lot more, I would say, coverage of various. It's not really. I suppose it is data sources, but other way, I suppose, how data is transitioned. They've added additional coverage of where they can help protect from that. So Purview DLP, as I said, it kind of Microsoft's now pushing towards having like a unified kind of what they're doing with Defender XDR and things like that, but a unified DLP platform, where originally DLP was really just for Exchange and SharePoint and OneDrive. I think it's fair to say probably 2-3 years ago, maybe a little bit further. And it was just Microsoft only. Like I said, SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, being able to do checks on data, things like that. And I'll go through some of the functionality within DLP itself, but I'll talk about sort of the locations, I suppose, that we can cover. So Microsoft kind of break it down into kind of 3 areas. So data at rest, data in use, and now data in motion, which is the new sort of functionality they sort of brought in recently. As I said, data at rest and data in use, this sort of covers 365 services, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams as well. It also includes the accounts as part of that. So, rest and, in motion within those services. It comes down to the Office applications as well. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Endpoint DLP. So Windows 10, Windows 11 and Mac OS. So be able to track, data in motion and data at rest on those endpoints. That's probably a very nice sort of functionality, isn't it, Sam? The endpoint DLP.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So we'll dive into a bit more about that later. Non-Microsoft Cloud apps, on-premise file shares and on-premise SharePoint, Fabric and Power BI workspaces, and Microsoft 365 Copilot. So that is sort of data at rest, data in use. Now, some of the new capability they've brought in very recently is around generative AI. So being able to see shadow AI. I think I talked about this about 2, 3, 4 weeks ago around some of this sort of shadow AI stuff. But being able to do DLP in the browser and network data security is kind of the 2 capabilities. So OpenAI, ChatGPT Google Gemini, DeepSeek, Microsoft Copilot, as well as the Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps app catalog. So anything within there being able to track, activity data, things like that as well, which is very new from that part. So yeah, that's the kind of data sources, and I think it's quite a lot. I mean, again, like I said, I think you'd be able to cover, a couple. Well, I say we'd be able to cover a couple of them. If we think about 2-3 weeks ago, I was talking about Gen AI security, and I think that would have included the DLP capability. So that's an episode in itself already. But yeah, so within all of these, they then have different controls, and you're able to use the Microsoft built-in sensitive information types, the SITs, which could be credit cards, IP addresses, bits of sensitive information that you might have, Swift codes, etc. Plus any custom ones you might have, or the tradable classifiers. Again, we could probably talk about all of that part as another episode. But using those to detect the types of sensitive information, as well as being able to say, whilst you might be able to use some of that sensitive information internally, you can then specify where it's leaving the organization, if it's going to specific domains, email domains, how it's being shared, whether if you are using sensitivity labels classifying the data, whether it the classification on a document or the email is at at a certain sort of classification. You can then use those conditions, and again, you can build those conditions to be it's quite simple or quite complex depending on what you need. You can then apply you can apply actions and policy tips. So within actions, it depends on what data source or I guess control that you're using. So things like Exchange, you can say require approval, block, encrypt it, block it from going out, the email going out, etc. Or you could just do tooltips or policy tips that come up and say, hey, this has got sensitive information. Should you be sending it? Can you create a prompt, prompt box to come up, an oversharing prompt box to come up in Outlook Classic, that kind of thing. So you can start to build it in 2 phases, and that's kind of what I was saying around sort of alerting and maybe trying to prevent oversharing by accident and not prevent it from being blocked. So maybe tooltips is like the first stage of deployment, so you can get users to understand where they should or shouldn't be doing it, and then put in some of the protections in place. If we talk about endpoint DLP, integrated in effect into Defender for Endpoint. So if you've already got MDE rolled out, it's just a checkbox. It's 2 button clicks to then onboard all Defender for Endpoint agents into endpoint DLP to start collecting some of that data, which I think is really easy, and you can manually onboard if you haven't got MDE rolled out as well in a similar way. But yeah, that gets it all out there, and then covering those endpoints. But some of the controls allows you to be able to block, copy, paste, upload to a cloud service, prevent data leaving to a USB drive, or encrypt it as it goes to the USB drive, or to, on the fly kind of thing. So almost just in time prevention there, with potential to override as well, and to capture that override information. And I think that's really key, because not only, and I think you've seen it, Sam, not only is it just doing this preventative stuff, but also you've got the monitoring side. So in Activity Explorer, you can see the activity going to USB pens. It might be you've got USB pens locked down, or you believe you've got USB pens locked down, or nobody uses USB pens anymore. Example, endpoint DLP is able to capture that activity, and you can realize that you need to maybe add some more controls in place because you thought it was locked down and actually it's not. But I think you've had that, Sam, haven't you, recently?
Yeah, I think the activity that the one thing when if I'm talking to an organization that's maybe maybe they've got MDE today, yeah, maybe they're E5 with MDE and they haven't really adopted like Purview DLP, right? One of the first things I really like to talk to them about is monitoring and data, because what a lot of times I see organizations struggle with is like how to start with DLP, because it's very customizable and very flexible, and it's almost too flexible in some respects, right? Because every organization is different. They have their own, regulatory frameworks they've got to follow. They've got their own sources of sensitive data, PII, financial,
and processes of how data leaves the organization, etc.
Yeah, and even internal like processing, governance and lineage of data, right? It's all different for everybody. That's why it's so flexible. But with that, comes I don't think the interface is hard to use, but in order to understand what you should put, what you should configure, it can be quite complicated to get started. But my roundabout point is that there is a treasure trove of data there that a lot of organizations aren't looking at. You use the example of device control with removable media. Okay. If I'm having a conversation, with an organization that does have device control in place, they'll simply say something like, well, we know it's blocked because we've set, corporate policy, but what this is a layer above that policy. This is actually looking at like another stream of data to attest, to verify that control is in place and it's effective as well. One thing I really like to do is look at, removable media usage and removable drive usage, and to suggest, a group of like approved devices with a DLP policy that alerts or, creates some activity, which, when a non-approved device is utilized, it might not ever get hit in a really sophisticated organization. But for organizations that don't have any device control today, those conversations are usually quite eye-opening, because they're like, I didn't know Sam over in accounting was using, a portable SSD to copy files back home so that he can print on his personal printer. Like those types of like, risky, insider actions. It's not malicious at that point. It's just somebody trying to, do their job whilst they're working from home. But they might not be following like, proper IT policy and process there. Do you see what I mean? And I think a lot of people are missing that today. They've got the data, they're just not actively monitoring it, because it's quotes data security, and it is data security, but it's also the same, because the activity that there's two types of activity that it tracks. One is like exfiltration type activity, which is like, you said it, like uploading to cloud, file sticks, removable media, copying via Bluetooth and all sorts of nonsense, right? But the other part of that is like what I call like benign activity, archives created, files created, files renamed, files deleted. It's not exfiltration, is it? That's like, data manipulation internally. And I think those exfiltration activity types are really important. And I think a lot of people are missing them, even if they're licensed for them, because they're not looking at them today.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, you may have some approved like USB pens that, all users that are, maybe it is full lockdown, but, certain devices or certain users are able to use USB pens. That's all okay, but then it is just on the trust of the user at that point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where DLP can at least identify sensitive information maybe leaving through those users, or, IP, etc. And it's not necessarily to, again, you might not necessarily need to block that activity, but maybe you're encrypting those, where supported at least, encrypting those files with a sensitive label. So at least then protected, it can leave, and if it ever, no one else can open it unless you're part of the organization kind of thing. There's other ways to be secure and still use that same process. But yeah, so yeah, it definitely covers some of those areas. And like you said, having monitoring and that is key, even with, and again, we're probably diving into a little bit around how you get started with it. But, with most of this sort of capability, you don't want to break business straight away with it, because again, you don't know what processes are taking place, because your users are blocked from doing something to do their job, and they have to take another route. It's almost like it is shadow IT in effect, shadow actions, I suppose, kind of thing with data to do their job.
Yeah.
You don't want to break that straight away. You need to resolve it, but you need to have a solution to resolve, rather than going, well, no, you can't do that now, and now you now can't run payroll or something like that because you're saying you can't send data to XYZ.
Well, can the first do you have to jump to full prevention straight away? Could you not start with user awareness? If Sam's using a I use my name, so I'm not blaming anybody else, right? if Sam's using a USB stick, or he's copying files via Bluetooth when he kind of shouldn't be, right? Before you go and put a block in place, is it not just worth sending a global awareness email, and then waiting another week and then seeing, oh, Sam's still using it. Let's just go and have just a guided chat with Sam just to talk about policy. And then, at that point, if you see sort of rampant usage, people keep using, I don't know, generative AI solutions because they just can't get enough of them, right? Then at that point, you've got the justification to say, look, we've tried this, let's go for a full-on block, and then quotes break business at that point, once you've got all that ammunition, at that point,
Yeah, definitely. It's and again, I kind of alluded to, it's not just the technology it's not just Purview that's doing that prevention per se. It is going to be user education about what they should and shouldn't be doing against those policies, corporate policies.
Yeah. Because that's the only thing I will say is, I have conversations with mainly, IT folk, right, who, are really concerned about breaking business, which I am also in a massive agreement, because I do believe the approach has always been to go to prevention, whereas, not all journeys end with prevention. I've worked with some organizations who are we'll just run the report every 2 weeks, and we'll monitor, and then once we've got enough data, then we'll look to prevent. But we don't need to put these walls up tomorrow, if that makes sense. This has been happening in our environment for decades, at this point, right? We've just got to work to better user awareness.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of organizations are concerned, worried about putting DLP in place because of that, going to prevention, stopping something from, not working, or it being, trying to understand how you put it in place, if that makes sense, because of, you don't know how some of your parts of your business, the data flows, how it should, where it should go and where it shouldn't go, kind of thing,
And when we know how easy it is to prevent or to not prevent, right?
Yeah,
exactly. It's literally, it's not a checkbox, but it's basically a single action that you can put on a policy, right? So, if you did want to rush prevention in, it is certainly possible, yeah. But it is so flexible that you can decide when you get to that point by yourself.
Yeah, and I suppose if we do talk about how do we get started with some of this, one part might be, like you said, is to put DLP policies in place, but you're just looking at the reports, enable it, but there's no actions, no user notification or anything like that. Maybe that's how you start to, again, build that knowledge of how data is flowing and who's triggering, because it might be that, you need to send out new comms out to say, hey, don't, we shouldn't be, showing data this way, globally. We're not, singling out users at this point. but like you said, then maybe go to that individual if it continues to happen to say, not necessarily to tell them off, but to understand why they're doing it. Why are you doing this? Because you seem to do it, daily to this, X, Y, Z, and it's because we're not able to access their SharePoint site because it's blocked, etc. So we have to send it via email, or we can't hit this organization's Dropbox that's secure, or whatever mechanism they might have. Try and work out why users are using alternative routes for the data. But I think there's probably a third stage or a second stage is actually doing the tooltips and the maybe the override side of things, where it's like a soft block, if that makes sense. Be able to tell a user, hey, that you're sending sensitive data in this attachment to these external users or to this person, personal email address. Please make sure you're complying with our data governance policy internally or communication policy. At least then they've had to click OK to it and they've had to make a conscious decision per se to it, which might then help reduce the accidental sending or start to deter that sort of activity. And then like you said, then with all that data, then understanding how you block and what exclusions you might put in place. Maybe you are able to send to X partner organizations, this types of data, but everyone else should be blocked. That's when you start building that policy up from there. So I think a lot of it is a journey, definitely. Email out through Exchange and potentially SharePoint are probably not the hardest, but probably the long running, because that's the where the most transitional data is happening. Endpoint DLP, again, that's probably quite similar, but whether you've got a policy that says no USB pen should be used, then that's quite sort of clear cut, if that makes sense per se. But comms out to users, notifications, and then looking at
for removable media, I prefer a approved device list, and with just user comms for anything you detect that's not on that list to start off with. That's a really good way to start, because usually when you then talk to the user and ask them, why are you using a personal removable pen? Oh, because my printer's been broken in my office for 3 months. You know what I mean? I've been taking these files home to print. You know what I mean? It's like, that's a really stupid example, but that will happen. You'll find those real weird edge cases, or when I'm at home, I can't print with my own printer because X, Y, and Z. So the only other bit that you did mention was policy tips. The other part of that I've seen work really well is when you monitor for the DLP undo activity, because you see that's a really good feedback mechanism where you allow users to undo DLP activity, so it doesn't block the user experience, but you get that feedback in the portal about what's happened. So I do really like to see how many hits you've had for a DLP policy versus how many times they've been undone as a percentage of activity, and you can then highlight those specific like data data activities, and then you can really form a hypothesis of why they did it without having to go and ask them about, hey Sam, why did you undo this DLP 3 weeks ago? Oh, I'm really sorry. No, we just want to know, why it didn't work for you, if that makes sense. So that's a really, really powerful tool.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it's like you said, it's really powerful. It covers a lot of areas. I think with the covering all the SaaS services that Defender for Cloud Apps can cover, it's going to be very strong. That's quite new at the moment. And generative AI preventing data going to those, as I said, a couple of 2 or 3, 4 weeks ago. Now, that's key as well from a DLP perspective.
Yeah, because file uploaded to cloud wasn't that great, like really, because it hasn't got that catalog. So I'll definitely be looking. I haven't used that yet, so I'll definitely be looking at that, because You really want a more generic, like, block or alert me to generative AI apps versus, chatgpt.com, gemini.google.com, blah, 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 blah. You don't need it to be that granular. You want that, that catalog, basically, which will be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, part of the DLP settings is that you can set service domains and groups of service domains, so you can specify what is allowed, cloud services. That is based on domains rather than...
Yeah, but you don't want to set that up, though, do you? Like, if you've got Defender for Cloud Apps, right? That's the whole point of it, that catalog, isn't it? Because I only really use it for the AI example, because typically organizations will just use like one or two AI solutions. So if you're just like a Copilot place, you just want to block everything else, don't you? Or at least alert on other things being used, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's lots there. Again, we could dive into the various other areas, and we probably touched some of them. On premise, using the file scanner, the Purview information protection file scanner, to be able to check the file shares and check permissions there, and whether it should or shouldn't have access there as well. So you can change the permissions there. Rather, it's not necessarily it'll be data at rest at that point, and just preventing it from certain users or certain groups from having access to it. So just changing the permissions locally for you to prevent XYZ from having access, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think, again, we could talk about this for hours. I think we've talked for 30 minutes on top of our 11-minute intro.
Right. So what about licensing, Alan? Who can get access to DLP?
So there is some capability that is part of E3, I believe. That's mainly around Office 365, Microsoft 365, data sources. So you can start there. But for endpoint DLP, plus some more of the advanced sort of side of things, you're looking at, in effect, M365 E5 capability, which breaks down to, let me just find it for all our combinations. So you've got the M365 E5 compliance add-on if you're E3. If you're got F3 licenses, your frontline workers, there's a security and compliance add-on, F5 security and compliance add-on, which includes some of it. If you want to break it down, not by the full compliance add-on, you can do information protection and governance, which gives you endpoint DLP, as well as some of the other parts that we've been talking about, Teams DLP and things like that, on top of the normal stuff. And I don't think you can break it down any more than that, I don't believe.
The only other cool thing you can do now is Business Premium E5 add-on as well, can't you?
True, yes. Yeah, you can add the E5 onto it, and it's a reduced price, isn't it, from what I remember?
If you combine it with security, it's reduced, isn't it, or something like that? It's like, yeah, it's quite a good combo deal, if I remember rightly, on top of Business Premium, if you can stay under that 300 user count.
Yeah, and as I said, you don't have to have Defender for Endpoint rolled out for Endpoint DLP. It's just a lot easier to roll out to if you already got it out there. So
it just shows the power of that connected ecosystem, isn't it? It's just like literally a singular button or two or something like that. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Yeah, and they onboard within 5-10 minutes start to onboard when they check in. So yeah. Cool. I don't think I had anything else. Like I said, there's probably a lot more we could talk about, but
yeah, my only other call out is that I think Microsoft's stance on it is they call it crawl, walk, run, in terms of like the different stages of like DLP and data security adoption. Really,
yeah.
I'm not the hugest fan of that description, because especially when you're working with a client, it seems like, nobody really wants to crawl, do they? Right? They want it to be effective, because I think even monitoring is effective. I don't think it is crawling. I think it does give you a lot more value than that. But the only thing I will say is there's some really good people at Microsoft in and around like the data security and governance space. So there is a lot of really good documentation out there. Again, it's not that specific, but in terms of like what you're trying to achieve and how you should think about it, Microsoft has some really good guidance there. But it's not going to be like conditional access in the way that it's like, here's like, some really specific, use cases that you want to use this for, if that makes sense. Conditional access was probably a bad example because it is pretty flexible as well, but you get what I'm saying. Like, it's not,
there is some defaults, isn't there? Block legacy authentication, etc., MFA on admins, that kind of thing. Where
And I suppose the only thing you haven't touched on is there are templates looking for specific types of data in the portals as well. So
true.
So if your organization is concerned about PII data being exfiltrated, there are templates that are, I would say, relatively good, especially as starting points for organizations to get started. So that is very powerful.
Yeah. GDPR, HIPAA, etc.
Yeah, GLBA, PCI DSS, etc. Really good.
Cool. Okay, what's our next episode then, Sam?
Okay, I don't know what the title should be, but it's going to be all of the other defenders for clouds.
Oh. Defender of clouds excluding.
I don't know how to describe it, but basically I've been going through this. All my previous episodes have been all around different Defender for Cloud capabilities, and I'm going to round up a bunch of the smaller ones and do them as one single episode, because I'm not sure you can talk about some of them for much more than 10 minutes. So I feel like it would be a bit of a cop-out if it was my turn to do an episode and I spent 15 minutes on Defender for DNS, so that's probably a bad example, but anyway.
Yeah, so it doesn't exist anymore.
So yeah, but you get what I mean. So yeah, like Key Vault, Resource Manager. Yeah. What else is there? I can't remember, but I'll bundle them all up into a little mega episode. Basically, that'll be my next one.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Okay. Did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. It really helps us reach out to more people like yourselves. If you do have any specific feedback or suggestions to our episodes, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you made it this far, thanks ever so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yep, thanks all.